Okay, so I'm going to go through how to review your training. I'm writing this slideshow just as a resource for the guys if you're looking to review your training and you're not quite sure what to write. This will hopefully give you some insight. So the first thing we want to go through, just to begin, is why is it that we're doing this? Why do we want to record and review our training? And like anything, we want to get good and we want to get good fast. But so to get good, you have to basically expand your frame of reference to what good is. So a lot of people, they're going from their frame of reference of, okay, I'm national champion now, and I know I'm that good, but what does a world champion look like? What does an Olympic champion look like? And you have to think, well, how can you tell? And the way you figure this out is you've got to go through, basically, you've got to make it your intention, you've got to make it your goal to get to that point. So you've got to make that large goal, and that's what we mean by the elephant. It's that large goal. You can't eat that elephant in one day. You've got to basically take little bites at a time. So when you think about that other concept of you don't get good doing the same dumb thing over and over and over again. You get good by mastering uh, elements, components, and principles, and then progressing those principles further forward towards that large goal, towards that proverbial elephant. So by doing this, by taking small steps forward, you won't notice big changes in a small space of time. So at the end of the training session, you may not feel like you've really progressed. But long term, if you do make one small change, if you make two small changes a week, for instance, then over a year, it's 52 weeks, you've made 104 small changes, which you can look back on and go, well, that's quite a big change. It's even that you could see that as a transformation, but you won't see it if you're not reviewing. If you're not reviewing, you'll just feel the same because we're just going to feel exactly the same as we are constantly, unless we do things mentally and emotionally to advance our emotional states. We're not going to feel any different as time passes, although we are changing. So the thing that will keep us motivated is gaining an awareness of ourselves, gaining an awareness of our changes, gaining an awareness of how we're advancing, and that will do two things. It will motivate you, but also you'll advance so much faster. Because you have to know if you're successfully correcting. If you don't know you're successfully correcting, and you go by just pure emotion, if you go by okay, I don't feel like I'm getting better, there might be things that you're doing really well that you'll just throw out because you just don't because it didn't work once. So you might go through like a traumatic experience. You might develop a really awesome cut kick, and pretty much 99.9% of your opponents cannot beat it. But then that one day you show up against the best kicker in the world, and he totally decimates you and destroys you with your cut kick. He exposes your inefficiencies. He shows you where you need to get better. He shows you where you need to improve. But you don't see that because you haven't developed a strong enough awareness of yourself. Then all you're going to do is you're going to throw away your best technique because you go, well, cut kicks don't work because I just got traumatized by that world champion just then. I have to throw it all out and come up with something completely new. When that might not necessarily be the case. That small 1% difference that made him better than you're exposed to that by extracting that information and looking at it through your review process, and then you can quickly make the adjustment to uh, to be better. Um, okay, so components. The first things I guess we have to go through. You got two major things. I said components, elements, and principles. Components are the pieces of your complete technique. So that word complete technique is really important. Complete technique means basically a technique that considers your four macro components: transitioning, defense, timing, and attack. So if you think about it this way, if you're throwing a roundhouse kick on a pad and you hit that roundhouse kick effectively, right? You make a nice clean strike. That's not necessarily going to translate in the ring because you haven't considered what transitional elements are required. For example, if I'm standing outside of attacking range, outside of range of the roundhouse kick, that roundhouse kick isn't going to work. So I've got to think, well, what do I need to do? What kind of stepping motion or whatever kind of transitional motion do I need to do to get into range to be able to throw that kick first? That's not enough on its own, because what's going to happen is once I enter into my attacking range, he's going to kick me with something. So I have to think about, well, what do I need to defend against as I'm throwing that kick? So as I'm defending myself against his kick, now I'm in a position to throw a kick because I've transitioned and I've nullified anything he's going to do to me, or she, if you're a woman listening to this. The third thing is, once you've got that transitional and defense elements in place, you've got the timing elements in place, which means because now you're there in the right time, you've got the right beat, you can time your shot now, and then you think about what the technical components of that kick within those three other parameters. And the main thing is, I constantly go over again, I'll talk about this later on in the later slides, is each component is giving you access to the next. So a complete technique is one that has full access to what it is you want to do in order to achieve your objective. Obviously, achieving your objective is scoring points, scoring enough points to win, scoring more points than your opponent. Now, there are an infinite amount of micro components that exist within those four macro components, and I cannot explain every single one of them. And the thing is, for you to eat that elephant, as I said before, is for you to get to that goal. They're going to be unique to you. Your own micro components are going to be unique to you. My micro components aren't the same for everyone's. I train a lot of people from a lot of different weight classes, and every weight class generally has its own different needs. But even within the weight classes, you get tall fighters who fight differently to short fighters. We're all born with the body structure that we have. They all come with their own strengths and weaknesses, and by learning what our best micro components are to achieve that goal, to eat that elephant in total, is totally up to us. And this is why it comes down to understanding why it's important to review, why it's important to constantly assess your training, because in that process, you're becoming aware of yourself, but you're also becoming aware of the components, and you're going through this creative process of figuring out, working out, and inventing. Sorry, I just got attacked by a moth. Inventing your own components as you progress, as you move along, and that's what you need to learn to do. So hopefully at the end of this slide presentation, you'll have a better understanding on how to do that and why it's important to continue doing that. Principles are universal. So principles are universal and they're undisputable. So I use this example of, like, when all is equal, straight lines will beat circles. But the other things, you got the other principles, like when you're in your attacking range, first kick's going to win. That's undisputable. Every single time, whoever kicks first in attacking range will score the point. It's not the fastest and the hardest. It's the guy with better timing is going to beat the faster and more powerful person. Then you've got the component of highest knee wins. Now that's just making sure that you've got a clear pathway, a clear line. And if your foot's higher, essentially it's closer. Your attacking tool is going to be closer to the target area. The third thing we talked about often is straight lines beating circles, because it's just simple geometry. Now a lot of people will use the term another principle, which, it's not necessarily a principle, is that anything can be anything. And there's some truth that anything can be anything. So a roundhouse kick can beat a back kick, but in some cases a back kick can beat a roundhouse kick. However, if all is equal and you're throwing a rear leg roundhouse kick against the back kick, that back kick's going to win. If we're kicking at the same time. Because back kick's a straight line kick, roundhouse kick is a circular kick. So you're going to get nailed by the back kick, which is why it's a common counter to the roundhouse kick once thrown in terms of interception. Any principle can exist in this situation. When all is equal, there are certain principles at play. Now anything can be anything if you can change the criteria around. So a circle can beat a straight line if you alter the range. If you go from a different position where they've lost control over their center line, but in that situation, you've used other principles to nullify that principle. But principles are universal and they exist when all is equal. That's basically my spiel on that one. So there are four, I should have a different slide for this, but there are four major areas we're going to go through in terms of reassessing: dissection, selection, sequencing, and then this we're going to go through measuring. Is the fourth section is going to be measuring, assessing, and reporting. It's really important that that last section takes place. So you're actually using, it's the action of actually using the information. You want to be able to break down techniques into its components. So it's different for everyone when you do this. Everyone, so this what's universal, I guess you could say, is transitioning, defense, timing, and technique are the four macro components that you want to consider. But then you're looking at inefficiencies based on the principles. So centerline theory has a lot of principles in it. The principles of who will score the point inside attacking range. The principles of most of it is the principle of efficiency, which is to do is to look at what creates maximal effect with minimal effort. You want to follow that principle at all times whenever you're looking at all these things. That the components that you want to work on and master are all designed to create maximum effect with minimal effort. You want to look for what is the minimal amount of work I can do that creates the maximum amount of maximum effect. If you're doing that, then you can literally multiply your productivity in the ring in terms of getting to your point by 10-fold, 100-fold. The sky's the limit. Your imagination is the limit if you're applying that principle to every component that you do. But that's up to you to try and break these things down. When you look at a situation, in a situation you're sparring or whatever, and you go, okay, I was in this situation, I couldn't throw this kick. What was missing? You've got to ask yourself the questions: what was missing? What was missing? What component was missing in that moment? Was it a transitional thing that was missing? Component was missing? And then if it was your transitioning, you were struggling to get one point to the other, what part of your technique was slowing down your transitioning? If it was a defensive thing, so you say your everything else was fine, but you got hit on the way in, that's why you didn't land your kick, then you got to look at defensive components. If you're getting into the right range, but you're kicking and still missing because they seem to dodge it at the right time, might be a timing issue. If you got everything perfect, but your kick is just ugly and horrible, it's not throwing a nice, strong, powerful kick, then you can look at the technical aspects. Now, again, it comes down to, it doesn't mean technique never means just throw it harder and faster. Throw your bad technique harder and faster. There are inefficiencies in your movement. There will be inefficiencies in your structure. There'll be inefficiencies in your posture and whatever. And I can create a completely different presentation for that, about talking about inefficiencies in general with technique, transitioning, and defense. But again, you just follow the principles. You just want to follow the principles at every section of the way. That's how you break down your technique and dissect it into its many components. Slide is very similar. It's called selection. So once you've got all your techniques down, broken down to all its components, or as many components as you can imagine and think of, then you want to use the 80-20 rule, which is quite simple. You just got to look at the 20% of components that do 80% of the work, and then you want to focus on mastering those. At the same time, though, you want to look at the 80% of components that do 20% of the work, and you want to try and delete them. But the most important things, though. So you want to take the most important of the things that do that you use 80% of the time that only do 20% of the work. You want to break those things down and try and eliminate them, because you'll find in your training there's something you do a lot of that doesn't achieve anything. So you want to delete that, and then you'll find very few moments you'll do something that's super effective. Okay, so in that case you want to do more of that. So it's about trying to break things down and figuring out, using estimations, what is the most effective things that I'm doing, how do I do more of it, what's the least effective things that I'm doing, how do I do less of it. Then you want to prioritize these components. So that's the next section in terms of sequencing. So putting things in order is really important. How do we figure out what order things go in? Well, we have to figure out what's going to give access to the next. So if I use the example of transitioning, defense, timing, and technique, well, transitioning gives you access to defense gives you access to timing, both of them do combined, And then those three combined, transitioning, defense, and timing, give you access to being able to land your technique. I hope this doesn't go too far across. Okay, so this is diagrams trying to explain it. So these little dots are components. I colored them to show advanced components versus beginner components, like white belt, yellow belt, green belt, blue belt, red belt, and black belt. Say you want to get to like elite level roundhouse kick. You've got to learn the basics first. So you've got to get the transitional elements, for example, right in your kick. Now, once you've got your white belt components, your white belt level components sorted, then you can start adding on the yellow belt level, the more advanced level of that component on. So you say this is like you want to get black belt level transitioning, then you're gonna have white belt level first. Once you've mastered it, it gives you access to be able to go to yellow belt level. Once you've mastered that, you're also working on your white belt level with your yellow belt level. Once you've mastered that, it gives you access to green belt, which gives you access to blue belt, which will give you access to red belt. And once you get to red belt, you've got access to blue, green, yellow, and white while you're practicing your red belt level technique. And you're developing access to get to that black belt level. Now, this constantly transcends all the way up to when you become the best in the world or the best in the Olympics. And then from there, you're still advancing yourself. You're still making yourself more efficient, because once you reach the world level, once you reach the Olympic standard, and there's no one left to beat, you're still going to advance. Because you're going to take responsibility. Because this whole process is about taking responsibility. This whole process is about taking responsibility for what you're doing, knowing that you're going to get to the stage where you will be the best in the world. And then from there, you're responsible for the world standard. So the better you get, the better the rest of the world gets. And this is why being an elite athlete, in my opinion, is so important, because when you're at the top in the world, you are the world standard. You are as good as Taekwondo gets. So the better you get, the better the whole martial art gets. Until you get to that stage, you get to enjoy the experience of learning how to get to that point. Then once you're at that point, then you get to enjoy the experience of getting a lot of what you want because you're the best, and becoming even better and taking the sport forward and further. So keep moving forward. Okay, so the measuring, assessing, and reporting. This is where everything gets really important, because you basically want to get a book and you want to take it to every single training session. Before each training session, you've identified already what the top components are that you're going to work, and then you're going to measure those components. So you might have 2 components per session that you want to work on, and then you want to advance those components to the next 2 sessions at the next session. So those components, for instance, could be your defensive timing. Say you want to learn defensive timing, if I use that as an example. Say you want to learn how to move when they kick and not move when they move. So for instance, it's a waste of energy to move when someone's not throwing a kick at you. So if you want to be super efficient, you want to reduce any movement you do when someone's not throwing a technique. And that also means they're not leading you. They're not moving you into any direction that you don't want to go in. And secondly, the moment they kick, you're always moving on their beat. So you're always able to read and pick up their inefficient movements, their telegraphed movements, and so on and so forth. And you're always able to get your defensive timing right. Now, there may be other components that are missing in your defensive timing, which means you can't get your defensive timing right. Okay, now you've got to write this down. Okay, so I'm moving on their kick 20% of the time, and then the other 80% of the time I'm getting hit because I'm getting fooled for whatever reason. So you've got to be able to understand, okay, what it is. If I'm 80% of the time I'm getting hit every time I try defensive timing, even though I'm isolating it, then it's like, well, what is it that's missing? Is it the fact that my footwork isn't good enough? Is it the fact that I'm not able to read their technique? Is it the fact that I'm letting them lead the tempo too much? Do I need to add another thing to give me access to defensive timing? Do I need to use my front foot a lot more to keep them at bay so I can lead and dictate the movement a lot more? So you've got to write this stuff down to give yourself an understanding of maybe there's a new component that you need to create and invent in order to give you access to defensive timing. Now, when you're getting good at it, you're practicing it, you're just working on rote, and you're practicing it, then maybe 20% of the time, by the end of the week turns 30% of the time. That's success for you. Uh, so you have to, in order to increase success rate, you have to identify the components that are missing um, in the times that you don't succeed. So that's this is about self-examination. You're self-examining, and then you're redesigning yourself in that process. Once you self-examine, you'll notice what's happening, and you'll see what's happening. You'll bring it into your consciousness. You'll bring it into your awareness, and then from there, you can begin to redesign yourself by inventing new components that will help give you access based on that same diagram I just did before. Don't spend, one thing is you don't want to, once you've got a component down and you think it's going to work for you, you don't want to spend too long on that component. So you don't spend too long on old components. There's no point. I mean, you can look at this strategically. Say you develop a really strong front leg and you've mastered it and it's perfect, but you're like, well, 95% I score, but there's still that 5% where I'm not scoring. So I'm just going to keep mastering it until I'm at 100%, until I'm perfect. But you're fixating too much on one technique and you're not advancing yourself. You're still, if you use your front leg to give you access to your back leg, for instance, you're still working on your front leg every time you use it to get access to your back leg. So you say, I want to score a point my front leg and I want to transition to back leg roundhouse kick. Well, every time you're doing a front leg transition to back leg roundhouse kick, you're still working on your front leg. So it's an old component that you've done a lot of work on to make it really good, but it's a waste of time just to fixate on that one thing. The other thing is don't over rehearse and don't sit around imagining what you need to do without action. Knowledge in experience is meaningless really, unless you're acting on it. Unless you're doing something with it, it has absolutely no meaning to you. So you have to understand, in order to give your experience meaning, in order to give your knowledge meaning, you've got to go out there and you've got to work with it. That is so important. If you have 10% of a component, still try it out and still try to advance it and always work to expose it. If you're failing a lot, you're doing something. There's no such thing as failure unless you just throw it away. You've failed at something unless you throw it away or you quit. It's the only time you fail. If you don't quit and you keep working on it, any progress you get is success. You've got to look at it that way. Success and failure aren't really polar opposites. Progress and giving up, they're your polar opposites. Success and failures are just ticks and X's on the process of learning. So you want to change your paradigm and you want to look at things differently. You want to look at enjoying the process of getting what you want, or enjoying the process of learning what you need to get what you want. Never look at things in terms of success and failure. It's so important to remember that way. Report structure. So when we look at this, what we want to do is, again, note down those 5 components. Every training you're writing this out. What components are needed to give access to the top 5 components? What components do the top 5 components give you access to? Measure each component, so going through what percentage did each component work, and then set a goal for the next training session. Okay, I'm 25% at this component, now I want to get to 30. You want to summarize your findings at the end of each week. So the key to that is to look at, okay, so every training session, say 5% Monday, 6% Tuesday, 7% on this component Wednesday, in terms of success. So you can say, well, say Wednesday it dropped, Thursday it lifted again. So you'll see things, you'll notice things throughout the week. So if you notice, say on Wednesday it dropped a little bit, there might have been something you were doing differently on Wednesday, which will ident that you were doing that you weren't doing on Wednesday that you're doing on Tuesday. And it's like, wow, if you notice that, then you notice that there was a component there. If you can pick up, okay, Tuesday I was doing this differently, that little component there is the thing you need to master to give yourself more access to get that 5% to 10% rather than that 5% to 6% if you see a drop. And this is why examining is super important. So doing everyday summaries is really important, and then doing a weekly summary to check your progress. Also, a good idea is to do 6-week or monthly summaries as well, or big long summaries over in between every single competition, so you can see the progress over 6 weeks, and you can see, okay, these are the components I've really worked on for 6 weeks, and this is what really got me the access I needed to go further and advance further and to get myself further. So this is the end of the presentation. I'm just going to go through final points. The main thing is it's all about trying to get yourself further, faster. It might seem like you're doing something tedious to begin with, but it isn't. It's not at all a tedious process. It actually becomes quite an enjoyable process. It might seem like you're doing it at the beginning. It might take you an hour to go through and analyze everything, especially the end of the week assessment might take an hour sometimes. But once you get, it's like any skill that you get. You start off 20% efficient. Then as you get more and more better at identifying your components and picking up things, you'll get 80% efficient. You'll find sometimes it's a 30-second assessment. You know exactly what percentages you're working with, what it was you were working on, and you just need it takes 2 or 3 minutes to write down everything. Sometimes it takes 20 minutes, but every single time you're doing it, it's a valuable experience, and you are going to get more efficient at it. The important thing, I think, going back to what I was talking before, is when you're doing a sparring review, you are deepening your awareness of yourself. You're discovering what it is you're capable of in that process. You're discovering what your potential is. But at the same time, you're redefining and reframing what success and failure are. And that's super important, is to redefine what success and failure is in your mind. So you don't want to see success and failure as what was in percentages. Okay, I did it 80% wrong, therefore I failed. No, if you progressed, that's success. And if you didn't progress, then whatever information you extract from that is also success. So you're going to win either way. So and the other thing is, it's so important to be willing to play with these ideas, play with your own creativity, play with your ideas. We evolve as human beings through play. So you've got to be willing to play with your ideas and enjoy the experience. So if I was to put that all into a nutshell, what I mean is, you want to enjoy the experience of getting what you want out of your training, or enjoy the experience of learning what you need to get what you want. So if I have to summarize everything into a final point, it goes right down to that one concept. And that was how I'll leave it. Focus on that one thing. If you get when you're doing the review process, focus on enjoying the process, playing with it, playing with your ideas so you can get what you want, or enjoying finding out and extracting out what you need to get what you want. Because this is about you and your understanding of yourself, and it's a tool for you to deepen your awareness of who you are and what it is you're capable of. Thank you for listening.